Welcome to Stoic Conversations. My name is Michael Tremblay.
And I'm Caleb Monteveros.
And today we'll be talking about Stoic strategies for dealing with change. This is something I wanted to talk about because this is something in Stoicism, we think a lot about focus on what's in your control, focus on what's in your control. But there's also this part of Stoicism, which is also uh, embrace the things that are outside of your control. Recognize what's outside of your control and have a healthy relationship with that as well. So it's both about caring about your character, your actions, your choices, putting the proper emphasis on the things that are up to you, and then learning how to live in harmony, in an appropriate relationship with the things that are not up to you. And so change is one of those things that is not up to you. Nothing remains how we want it to be. We might lose our job. We might have relationships change. At a grand level, everyone we know will die. The cities we live in will cease to exist. There's just the world is in this state of permanent flux.
Or just
That's
getting
something.
started. Now I'm feeling all dour.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. That gets you pumped up. Hope anyone listening to this is enjoying their nice evening walk, thinking about the idea of oblivion. But it's true, right? Things change, bigger and smaller changes. We don't have the capacity to control or retain the things we like or want. We don't have the capacity to keep our life the way we want it to be. If there are parts of it that we do want to remain constant. So how do we deal with this? How do we overcome the kind of stress or anxiety that comes with that? I want to look at 3 Stoic strategies today. I've pulled out some quotes that I also think emphasize these strategies or elaborate on these strategies. And I pulled these out and prepped this episode. But Caleb, as always, you'll be jumping in and providing your feedback or insight as well. Any other context you wanted to add before we jumped into it?
Well, it's a great topic. It's a big one. And I was just thinking about change in my own life and how that changes it. I suppose you've got change sort of in a sense of milestones, both positive and negative, as you say, entering a new relationship, ending a relationship, starting a new career, gaining loved ones, losing them. But there's also a kind of change in the background circumstances of our life too that can shape things in a powerful way, of course, whether that's general change in the state of one city, the economy, things you weren't expecting about your health or something of this sort. Both so change is big and small. It's certainly something we're surrounded by and often catches one off guard. So it's a good topic to revisit, even if perhaps there's no change that you're struggling with now.
Yeah, and I was just when you were thinking about the city, you giving that example of the city, the word nostalgia, but it comes from feeling pain. It's a Greek origin, but it's about feeling pain about wanting to return home or wanting to return to the way things used to be. And so you can almost think of that of this nostalgia, this longing for, my city was so much better back in the day, or do you remember how things used to be, or this period of your life that you look back upon positively, but it almost hurts because there's that feeling of I can't get back there, or things have changed in a way that I can't return to. That's an important part of it too.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. So I'll jump into it and get your insight as we go as well. So the first strategy, and really this is why I started this episode, is I wanted to just think more carefully about this quote. It's a famous Epictetus quote. But the first strategy is I would say it's to emphasize your connection with nature and change as a part of nature. So maybe it's this idea that, things aren't happening to you. You're a part of what is happening, which is being a part of nature, and nature is constantly changing. And when we recognize we're part of nature, then maybe we focus a bit more on how lucky we're to have the thing in the first place, rather than thinking I'm kind of this separate, I'm Michael, I'm separate from the world. I want to keep the world a certain way, and the world kind of chugs along without me, and it makes me sad. The quote for this is from Epictetus Handbook 11, or the quote that made me think of this strategy. And Epictetus says, "Never say about anything, I have lost it, but rather I have given it back. Is your child dead? It is given back. Is your wife dead? She is given back. Is your farm taken away? Well, that is also given back." And a student says, "But the person who took it was bad. And does it matter to you through what means the giver demanded it back? For so long as he gives it to you, take care of it. But as something that is not your own, as travelers, sorry, let me try that last part again. For so long as he gives it to you, take care of it. But take care of it as something that is not your own, as travelers treat an inn." Um, so there's this view here, and I said emphasize your connection with nature, and he's like, think of it as not belonging to you. But I really do think the root cause of this kind of uncomfortableness with change, or the kind of symptom you might feel here, is what I was trying to get at, is like, these things belong to me. I'm kind of separate from the world. This is my house. This is my sibling, my child. They belong to me. And when they're taken from me or things change, somebody has deprived me of something. Somebody has unjustly taken something from me. And Epictetus's point of giving it back is that, really, you're just a part of this changing universe. You're this part of this changing world. So you had this opportunity to be in this moment of time, spend time with this loved one, have this unique experience, live in this unique place. But that was never owed to you. It never belonged to you. And it continues, continues along the same path as all other things does. It continues along this path of change. And so it wasn't taken from you. It just returned to nature, or returned to, from where it came. And so there's not this sense of, I guess it is this shift of, I'm not deprived of things when things change. Rather, my opportunity to enjoy it, that chance I had, has kind of run out. And I think it's an important mindset shift. It's one that I struggle with. But what do you think about that, Caleb?
Well, I suppose the main idea is that the something that, of course, the Stoics hold so much of our suffering is a result of mistaken judgments. And Epictetus is stating that we assume things belong to us in a way they don't. And it's that assumption that causes us it causes us to not accept the inevitable, the reality of change. And that's both before it happens and perhaps when it happens. So it's sort of a mix of a diagnostic and then with a strategy for managing change.
Yeah, and the strategy then is this shifting from "I have lost it" to "it is given back," which reframes the change from, again, some sort of wrongdoing or deprivation to something natural, something normal, which it is. And so I think so much of these cognitive mistakes, as you talked about, Caleb, we have such less difficulty identifying them in other people. If you see extreme grief in other people, or an extreme sense of nostalgia, it's much easier if I'm looking at somebody else who's missing, for reminiscing about when they were younger or something like this, and you say, oh well, there's a kind of sadness in that, but it's normal to get older, and you probably shouldn't stress about it too much, because there's nothing you can do about it. It's happened to every other person that's ever existed. It's very easy for us to say that to other people, but we kind of struggle to do it for ourselves often, or at least I find I do.
Absolutely. And it brings to mind the practice of premeditatio malorum, imagining that you've lost something and then realizing that you haven't lost it and sort of seeing things with fresh eyes, I suppose. You're trying to reframe the possibility of loss in a way that sort of reveals that what you have is fortunate. If you think
Hmm.
about change, that ultimately has to do with the whims of fortune. And we focus on loss, but spend less time thinking about the things we take for granted, I suppose. It sounds cliche, but I do think this framing is useful to think about instead of the possibility of loss or shifting things to thinking about what you have, what you had, what you'll get as a matter of fortune, because it is out of one's control. And there's a kind of, I suppose, gratitude in that.
It is a bit cliche, but it is the idea of, if you take for granted what happened, then you assume that as a baseline, and you feel like you're being deprived of it, instead of this kind of gratefulness. And as you said, the premeditatio malorum imbues in us that kind of gratefulness. Man, I'm not owed this opportunity. This is not a default for someone like me to have these things. Many people don't have these things, and so I'm grateful I get that chance. It's a big mindset shift.
I think so. I think it's also connected to, if you think about the strategy, emphasize your connection with nature and change as a part of nature. I think that points to the idea that change is harder to handle when it arrives as a surprise. And the Stoics, especially Marcus Aurelius, he notes that in a way it's foolish to be surprised by the sorts of things that happen, because when you step back, it was a possibility, but for whatever reason, I think the changes that probably hit us hardest are things we assumed would never change, right? They're just assumptions we make, and then something sneaks up on us and we realize, oh, that was a mistake. I shouldn't have assumed, that I'd always be able to do this, or that the world was so just, so engineered in my favor that this deal would never fall through, and so on.
Yeah, that goes right into the second strategy. This idea, as you put it, of trying to not be surprised by these things. And so the second strategy I have is expanding your conception of time so that you view change as a constant. And so the argument here is that change is only disruptive because it's surprising, as you said. And it's surprising because we focused on a very small part of time. I mean, there's many reasons it can be surprising. We think we're owed things, or we haven't thought about the possibilities. But Marcus' point is like, look, if you many of these things won't be a surprise if you think about it in a large enough time frame. So if we expand our conception of time, then change just becomes another constant. It becomes a thing to accept. So not something that won't surprise us. So I have two quotes here. One is from Meditations 9.32. And Marcus says, you can get rid of many superfluous troubles that depend entirely on your beliefs. That's the point you were raising earlier, Caleb, about this idea that we suffer because of what we think. And you'll immediately provide yourself with plenty of mental space. Encompass the whole universe with your mind. Contemplate the everlastingness of time, and consider the speed with which individual things change. How short the time is between birth and disintegration. How vast the time before your birth, and how similarly infinite the time after your disintegration. Maybe you need to be a bit more of a advanced Stoic to find that one immediately reassuring. But the point is, we have a lot of these troubles. A lot of these things are stressing us. If we contemplate the speed of change, the everlastingness of things, it actually can help resolve some of those. We can put the changes in the proper space, or put them in the proper frame of mind. Another quote here is Meditations 9.28. Marcus says, soon earth will cover us all, and then earth too will change, and an endless sequence of changes will take place. First, the changing of the earth, and then the changing of what the earth changed into, and so on ad infinitum. If one bears in mind these successive waves of changes and alteration and their speed, one will come to see everything that is mortal as contemptible. Again, an intense ending there, about seeing this kind of but it's almost this rejection of the pettiness of the troubles we have, I guess is the way that I would put it. The almost
Mhm.
the, oh God, I can't believe people are stressed about what am I going to do Thursday night? What does this person think of me? What am I gonna wear to this event? What if you can actually imagine the 6 billion years the Earth has been around, the billion years that it will last after we're gone, and we kind of have this large time frame in mind, and all of the changes and what a small blip we are within that. I think that it is this adopting this cosmic perspective. It is in some way a kind of modification of the view from above. But I just think that when we look at the world like that, how small many of the changes we experience seem when put in the context of our entire life, let alone the entire history of the universe or the entire history of the planet. What do you think?
Yeah, I think Marcus Aurelius's most pithy statement of this perhaps is the universe is transformation, life is opinion, which is one of my favorite lines of his, and it cements this view that everything is impermanent, everything's changing, the world is in flux. It's not a static thing and a part of, if you think about the Stoic project as pursuing knowledge, something one is aiming to know, and sort of in the deep sense, feel it in your bones type sense, is that this is the structure of reality, constant change. So very, very in line with, I think, Western accounts of Buddhism in that sense, and probably Buddhism proper as well.
Yeah, in many ways, these are all just going to be different strategies of the part that you said the first, right? As you said at the start, which is we're thinking about things the wrong way. Stoicism is providing these kind of cognitive strategies for thinking about things differently, so that change is less upsetting. And I think the insight here is, as you said, both in Buddhism as well, less of an emphasis on, or just placing less importance on kind of the day-to-day events. Keeping things in a larger framework is really, really helpful. Not trying to, there's that big stream in Epictetus of, don't complain about things that are inevitable. Marcus Aurelius says, don't be surprised when a fig tree produces figs. That's one of my favorite pithy lines of his, to go along with yours. And this is the same kind of thing, which is like the universe is this, as you said, it's change. Life is opinion. If you recognize that, you're not going to be surprised by these moments. You're going to have them in mind. You're going to be prepared for them. And just giving us that kind of perspective that lets us pull ourselves out of our moments of stress or moments of anxiety that often comes from us trying to control things we can't control, or a rigidity in our beliefs about how things should be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I suppose at the practical level, I find thinking about things from the cosmic perspective is perhaps most useful during moments of crisis. It's a way to get a breather, get perspective quickly. But in terms of building up a habit, where you can inhabit this perspective of, seeing, almost seeing the world from a larger standpoint, I think it's difficult to do. It's hard to ingrain that in a way where you, you aren't shocked by change, just because that perspective is so different from our everyday experience. So I do wonder, I'm curious about your own case as well, but in my own case, I think I found it useful almost to try widen the scope of time in a smaller way. That feels less difficult to me, and perhaps is a easier way to build up a habit where you're thinking about things, not in terms of millennia, but
Yeah.
in a terms of, this is my focus for the month, this is my focus for the year, this is the stage of life that I'm in, and this is what's important now. And having a framework that's at least you're still looking at things that are from a perspective that's larger from the the moment to moment, and that can help guide action and keep you rooted in a way. But it's not as perhaps difficult to find that space as it is to jump immediately into the cosmic perspective and stay there for
Yeah, you don't, Caleb, you
days.
don't daily think about the infinite time after your disintegration. That's not part of your daily routine.
Well, I do,
Um,
but it just doesn't stick with me. I forget it. That's the issue, I think.
yeah, yeah. Um, so the point here is that when we can play around with time, we've got a lot of different time spans to play with. And there's this kind of question, will it matter? I sometimes find myself asking that question, will it matter in 3 days, 3 weeks, 3 years? And kind of having that, um, that is something that's really helpful and really quick for me as well. Um, there's also, I think the point that maybe you were hitting on a bit, if I was understanding you correctly, of like, this is this certain period of my life. Maybe I'm in midlife now, where I was a teenager before, I was a young man before, and those kind of periods of time have certain things that you should expect of them and try to make the most of. And then there's also kind of a recognition that those periods of time will change. And so
Mhm.
instead of thinking about the entire universe, you're thinking of maybe, I'm in university. I should enjoy partying. I should enjoy spending time with my friends, not working a full time job quite yet, but also be okay when I graduate, be prepared for that to change and like see what that is when I'm in it and like recognize basically having enough mindfulness to say this is a 4 year period of time, X number of year period of time that I should enjoy, make the most out of, but not try to hold on to or linger around too long. Um, this is a bit different from Marcus. The quotes Marcus was bringing up, but maybe a similar kind of strategy of having a good conception of time is a helpful way of dealing with change. It comes back to that point before, but it's just not surprising us because you don't want to be that kind of person who, let's say use the university example, you graduate and you haven't given any thought about that upcoming change. You haven't given any thought to the fact that you're entering a new life stage and it kind of really hits you off guard. Um, is that similar to kind of the strategy you were talking about or a bit different?
Yeah, I think that's similar. It's definitely similar. I suppose the problem is, or the problem that I was thinking about is, how can you create effectively the habit where you're not surprised by change? And one way to do it is regularly meditate from this cosmic perspective, whether that's pure contemplation or spending time in nature, consuming art that expands one's sense of time. And I do think that that can work, but at least you're trying to come up with a solution that impacts you day to day, such that when a change occurs that's striking, you're able to face it. And I suppose the it's it just strikes me as a difficult place to inhabit this cosmic perspective right away. So maybe an easier thing to do is thinking about taking the habit of when something arises, stepping into a large, being comfortable stepping into a larger perspective of time, but that's not necessarily the cosmic one, but even the level of a lifespan, or as you say, a life stage.
Yeah, I would agree with that. When we make this kind of distinction between preventative exercises, or I have in my research before written about preventative exercises. So these kinds of things that prepare us, make us stronger. We're more prepared for adversity. And then almost like therapeutic exercises, things that help us in these moments of crisis.
Hmm.
So maybe we think of that cosmic perspective as a therapeutic exercise. Like I'm in this moment of grief. What are some cognitive tools I have to snap myself out of it? And one is like a sustained intentional meditation on this cosmic perspective. And then there's in terms of a more preventative exercise, maybe it's just thinking about your life in terms of stages, thinking about your life in terms of as you said, a lifetime of um, and the accepting the fact that your life at 20 is not going to look like your life at 40. You might have different friends, some people you care about might have passed, kind of recognizing these rhythm or steps to human life more generally, But what both share in common is expanding this time frame outside of just the day to day. Because when we're in the day to day, we're trying to control things. We're trying to determine the outcomes of our day, and we maybe get surprised by the variability or the things that come up outside of our control in that process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's well stated.
Cool. So another one is strategy 3. So number 1 was that idea of emphasizing your connection with nature. See, like, it's change is this natural thing. I'm not owed anything. If something's taken from me, I've given it. If I lose something, it's been given back. It's rejoined. It's part of nature. It's not, it wasn't taken from me because it never belonged with me to begin with. Strategy 2 is expanding that conception of time. Change is a constant when you give enough of you have a broad enough perspective, and you can reflect on that consistency of change. And strategy 3, I'll call it emphasizing the agency, however small, you do have to influence this change. So even though the world is changing, it's an incredible thing that we get to play our part. We get to do what nature is currently demanding of us, in Marcus Aurelius's words. We still have a degree of agency. If we focus on this, we can find meaning even in a changing world because we're contributing to that change. We're participating in that change. We're, providing our own input to the future state. And often in Stoicism, we talk about, there's these things that are entirely up to us, and there are these things that are not up to us. But that's not to say there aren't things that we influence. The Stoics, they think they're not up to us because we don't determine them. But there's this entire category of things we influence, determine, have an effect upon. And sometimes we can lose if we just focus on the things that are up to us, just my choices, forget the outcomes, just my beliefs, forget, how my actions influence the world. We can lose some of the meaning that comes from, actually contributing to things and changing things. So a quote here from Marcus Aurelius, 9.31. This is the same. This is all from book 9. So he was feeling very, very reflective when writing book 9. Marcus says, the universal cause is a torrent. It carries everything with it. So my friend, what to do? Just do what nature is currently demanding of you. If you have the opportunity, go ahead straight away, without letting your attention be distracted by wondering whether anyone will know what you're doing. Don't expect to create Plato's ideal state, but be satisfied if you make even the slightest progress, and regard that in itself as no small achievement. So when he talks about the universal cause, he basically means fate, the unfolding of reality, fate, time. It's chugging along, it's pushing, it's unfolding, it carries everything with it. So what do? Well, recognize what nature is demanding of you and try to play your part well. He says, don't create Plato's ideal state. And he's the emperor. He's referencing explicitly the philosopher kings from Plato's Republic. He's saying, I don't have to attach myself to this ideal, to being the perfect parent, perfect friend, perfect at my job. I can just, in the moment, make a little bit of progress, make a little bit of change, do a little bit of a good thing. And if I do that, don't think of that as no small achievement. Respect and appreciate what I've done in that moment. So I think that's about emphasizing your agency, saying I have this capacity. Life has changed, universe has changed, but I have a capacity to influence it. Especially if I can recognize, what I'm well suited to do, what I have the ability to do well, and I can act on that. And there's meaning in that, even though I'm not God. I don't control everything. I can't do things that are impossible, but I can do some things, and that there's something meaningful about that. Again, if we really think about it and keep it in our minds.
Yeah, I've thought of one framework that I really like and that I got from the French philosopher Pierre Hadot is this idea that the sage is able to combine the perspectives of the whole and the part. And I think that is what this speaks to. They're able to sort of inhabit this cosmic perspective that the other two strategies touched on, this larger perspective, but at the same time, they don't lose sight of what's in front of them, the task at hand, and I think that's a beautiful picture and perhaps a target as well. You don't want to become too detached by zooming to these larger perspectives. At the same time, you don't want to become too attached to the here and now. So that's a matter of almost combining this framework of seeing things uh, from the level of where you are, while also being aware of the larger picture. And both of those are essential. Both of those have meaning. Both of those sort of tell, the story of your life on one hand, story of our lives on the other.
I mean, I love that. I love that idea of I probably read that before. If it was in, is it in the Inner Citadel?
Yeah, it's something he talks about in a number of different places, but
Um,
it's in the Inner Citadel for sure.
yeah, I guess I'm just at a point where that resonates with me more now. It's so hard to do, and it's this capacity because we often think about switching between the two. I mean, you even gave that example of, I can't go around and think about the infinity of time after my disintegration and then go, and go to the post office and wait in line. Like there's this kind of tension. So you can apply that, or you can be in the moment and be like, I'm so stressed because I got to make it to this appointment on time. And you're like fully inhabiting your role, your perspective as
Mhm.
an individual, your kind of day-to-day objectives. What a difficult task to balance both of those simultaneously and kind of keep both of those in mind. You got in perspective the universal cause. Again, that's a interesting translation, but probably just some sort of version of fate or providence or um, reason, logos. It's unfolding, it's happening. I'm keeping that in mind, but I'm also asking, well, what does that mean for me? What's the another analogy? What's the plot of the play? But at the same time, what's my role in it, and how can I play that role well, as Epictetus would say. Um, Not an easy thing to do. I find a lot of philosophies try to do one or the other, or at least that's maybe my shallow reading of Buddhism. Is you're trying to kind of disintegrate the perspective of the part. Um,
Mhm.
so interesting task of Stoicism to maintain both simultaneously.
Yeah, there's an example from a philosopher named Eric Wielenberg. I think it's in his book Value and Virtue in a Godless Universe. Perhaps Virtue and Value in a Godless Universe, where he talks about being at a high school basketball game or something like this and just going wild in the stands with his friends and just being in the moment. And then some teacher comes over and says something like, "You guys won't care about this in a couple of years." And he's like, that teacher just sort of missed the point in a way where they're, that for that point in time, it was to truly sort of be in, I don't know, play the role of a high schooler at that moment. It absolutely made sense to go wild in the stands, have fun with his friends and so on. It doesn't, it's not a matter that you need to pour a bucket of cold water on and such. And at the same time, you don't want to be the kind of person who's always reminiscing, those days with my buddies, and that was the time. And now now everything's perhaps your life didn't turn out the way you want, so you hold on to that kind of image in the past. And I think you want to be able to be able to be that person who celebrates in the moment and then moves on to celebrate in the next moments, whatever that happens to be.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. I think if I think of the ideal Stoic, it's exactly that picture. It's the person that is really happy at their high school basketball game or like really enthusiastic because they care, but isn't, you said, isn't reminiscing. And then they care when they're a young adult and or when they're a parent. And they also accept that their kids move away as they go into older age because that's what that stage of life demands. It's the kind of in that's that idea of thinking of change as a constant is that when you think of it as a constant, not this thing that's being deprived of you, it's like, well, I had some opportunities now in this role, things will change, and I'll have some opportunities then. And I'll have some different roles to play. I'll have some different things that nature is demanding of me, as Marcus is putting it. And I can like live, I can genuinely care about those things and also be prepared for them to go away. Um, wow. And like what a state that would be to achieve.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, sometimes I get close to that. Sometimes I'm further from that, but that to me is the Stoic ideal. That would be great.
Yeah, something I've been thinking about recently is it seems like it's really those transitional moments that are difficult. I've noticed both of us do martial arts, and I've noticed people as they get older, you deal with injuries, and there are some people who don't, maybe they're in their 50s or 60s, don't want to let go of that role of themselves as an athlete. I think typically these were people who were, very successful, very fit, but they've stacked up too many injuries that, they're in that transitional period where they probably need to find that next stage of life. And I've used to think, the people who go hard even when they're older and end up hurting themselves, I used to think that was silly, but now maybe I know myself more, and I think that's a very real possibility for me. So, how am I going to handle, these sorts of situations, that sort of transitional period where, I can't do what I used to be able to do, and thinking about that moving between, different stages physically. Just a simple example I've been thinking about just because of, I guess, personal events in my life, seeing others.
Yeah, but I guess it is just like grief and loss. Um, Going a bit away from these quotes we gave, I mean, grief can mean a lot of different things, but it's kind of like I used to be this young, successful athlete, and now I'm this old man. And instead of becoming this mentor or a coach or, kind of person who steps away from the sport because I only wanted to be an athlete, and you can only be an athlete in your young years. I'm stuck in this kind of in between stage, as you said, which is kind of a tragic figure. Think about the person who talks about their high school football career, and there's a kind of tragedy to this. If you make it a too substantial part of your identity, because you're not able to move on or transition. I think about a lot about what Martha Nussbaum wrote in Upheavals of Thought. She talked about the loss of her own mother and did it through this kind of cognitive Stoic perspective. And this idea is, she lost her mother and she feels like she's going to die, like her world is ending. This is the worst thing that's ever happened to her. And then there becomes a transition. As you said, there's a transition moment, and she can either hold on to that and stay in that mode for the rest of her life, and the grief will maintain because she's maintained the same beliefs, or she can transition, which becomes, oh, my mother is this amazing person.
Mm-hmm.
I was so lucky to get to know her, but I don't need her or to have her in my life, but I don't need her in my life to continue to live well. There looks like a version of my life that is well lived without this person. And so she hasn't she hasn't changed the belief that her mother matters, or her mother was a great person, or she loved her mother. She instead changed the belief, which is like, I need to be able to see my mother to live a good life, or I need to be able to have a relationship with my mother to have a good life. It's quite a heavy example, but I think it illustrates the point of like, you can say, oh, it was a great thing that I was a good athlete. But then I can, when the transition is, well, I can still think it was a good thing to be a great athlete. That was a thing worth doing. It was a thing I enjoyed doing, but I don't need to be a great athlete now to have a good life. A good life can look like something different. And in fact, there's some facts about reality that mean that I probably shouldn't try to be a good athlete now. It's probably an ill fit. I'm kind of ignoring how my life is changing.
Yeah, I think that's really useful. I think it connects to Marcus Aurelius's line, just do what nature is currently demanding of you. At least that's what I'm thinking of now, where perhaps you're stuck on a previous demand, and
Yeah.
the grief case is hard. But if you think about, the case of you changing your physical capabilities, at some point you move to become more of a mentor, become more of a coach. And if you're able to make that transition, then you found a new demand, a new role that you can fulfill. And it's perhaps those people who, may either don't want to, or for whatever reason, perhaps feel unable to move like that, shift their identity, shift their role, that really struggle with these kinds of changes.
Yeah, I mean, another example is in terms of parents. Um, the role that you will take as a parent shifts even from young age to teenagers to young adults. And where do you get in these fights? You get in these fights because it's like you're trying to treat your teenager like they're 12, or you're trying to teach your adult child like they're a teenager still. And there's that kind of, as you just said, I think it's just another example of what the role demands of you shifts over time. Because you can think of the athlete role as, your role is to contribute to the art, participate in the sport. But what that looks like at 25 is different than what that looks like at 55.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. So that was really helpful for me. We looked at 3 strategies. We talked about emphasizing your connection with nature. And that's really this idea of, you know, I'm part of this bigger thing. And as part of this bigger thing, I have this opportunity to have relationships or have a piece of a job or a piece of land. But it was usually I would use the example. I don't know how people are. Maybe some people are prideful of their farms here, but maybe their property in some capacity. But if that changes, well then that was never owed to me. Didn't belong to me. Again, it was a part of nature, which I'm also a part of. Second idea we talked about a lot about was expanding your conception of time. There's different time frames, different ways to do that. You do this kind of cosmic perspective, the infinity of time, how we are just a blip in it, and like our entire life is just a small little blip of change. Or you can even just go kind of phase by phase of, I need to keep in mind that this is one phase of my life, and that phase will change because what's expected of me changes over a lifetime. And then the third strategy, though, those are kind of preventative. Third strategy that is more positive, provides more meaning, is to say, well, change is this opportunity to enact your agency. You have an ability to participate in that change, to make something of that change. And that line I'll take away from that is this idea of just do what nature is currently demanding of you. There, in any moment, when you're the young athlete, there's these opportunities that are available to you and unique to you. But now when you're this older, maybe an older individual, now maybe you have different opportunities available to you to mentor, to coach, to give back to the community, to help other people who are in their prime, or some people choose to compete in kind of masters competitions as well and things like that. But like, be honest about your current stage, be aware of what nature is providing, demanding of you, your current role, and then exert your agency in that lane. And that's kind of a meaningful way to engage with change. The other idea I'll think of coming from this conversation, Caleb, was that idea of the part and the whole, maintaining both those perspectives. We need to maintain this perspective of the part to give our life meaning. I need to be able to cheer at the basketball game, and I need to be able to maintain this perspective of the whole to navigate when those parts change. When you go from being the student at the high school student at the basketball game to, well, now you're working your first job. You navigate that by keeping in mind this perspective of the whole. That'll be a big takeaway for me as well. That's my summary. Any other thoughts you had?
Yeah, well summarized. I hope these strategies are useful for others. I think I found the practice of shifting perspective, focusing on different time spans, exceptionally useful. And I think something that I'm thinking about as a result of this conversation is something that can help manage change. I think is at once being able to take a larger perspective, but also looking at, what does nature demand of me now, and finding that, looking at things realistically. And I think finding that as a source of meaning too is also a good strategy.
Yeah, totally agree. Awesome. Thanks, Caleb.
Cool. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for listening to Stoic Conversations. If you found this conversation useful, please give us a rating on Apple, Spotify, or whatever podcast platform you use, and share it with a friend. And I'd like to thank Michael Levy for graciously letting us use his music. Do check out his work at ancientlyre.com, and please get in touch with us at stoameditation.com if you ever have any feedback or questions. Until next time.